podcast for developers by developers, where we discuss technology and trends in industry. I'm your host, Tony Monkolsmine. One of the biggest challenges with deploying an AI solution is aligning that solution to your particular business domain. Either you build a model from scratch, or you can do what many businesses are doing today, which is taking a foundational model and trying to adapt it to a business use case. Seekr is helping businesses solve these problems. Today, we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the underlying principles and technology that make Seekr work. And to do that, we are joined by Sefanos Poulis, Chief of AI Research and Development at Seekr. Welcome to the podcast, Sefanos.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Great to see you, Raul.
All right. And we are also joined, by Raul Nair, who is one of our recurring cast members and the lead of engineering at the Intel Liftoff for Startups program. Welcome to the podcast again, Raul.
Always incredibly excited to have a conversation with you, Tony. This is going to be great. There's a lot of technology that we'll be talking in this session. Can't wait.
So to start off, let's go to Stefanos. Stefanos, why don't you tell our audience about what Seekr is?
Absolutely. Again, thank you for having me here. So what is Seekr? So our vision and mission is really how we like to think about it, trust in the web. And what that means and how it manifests in the different products that we're building may be different depending on the different product line. But yeah, trust in the web is what Seekr is essentially trying to bring to the market.
And so what does trust mean to Seekr? Trust can mean a lot of things. What exactly do you mean by trust when you talk about it from Seekr's point of view?
One of the products that we have at Seekr is called Seekr Align. Align is a content evaluation and analysis platform that looks at content from a lot of different modalities: text, web documents, images, videos, audio, and it's trying to analyze, using AI, analyze and score that content along various dimensions of quality. And quality has a lot of different dimensions. You can think of quality in news, say, documents. Do news documents or articles respect specific journalistic principles, such as clickbait, or are they making certain types of attacks, or is there any subjective language? Is the attribution in this news document proper? So news is just one example. We at Seekr, we score a lot of different modalities: audio, podcasts, web documents, and this idea of scoring and evaluating brings trust in that it helps businesses, users, developers shed light to really the quality of the content that they're consuming. For example, for the advertising industry, advertisers can now easily find brands, and advertisers can actually easily find content that they can associate their brand with, that is aligned with their values and principles, and they can safely say, okay, we want to put our ad next to that podcast, or along the lines of that host.
That's very interesting, Stefano. So in a way, it's like your monumental task is to clean up the web, especially with a lot of generated content, deepfakes, and it becoming very cheap to create ton of content. The challenge that you at Seekr seems to be very monumental. Is there any data point on how much data you process every day? The different modalities, and roughly how much compute you take to do that?
A lot, I think, is the short answer. But just for a specific, let's take a specific vertical that we tackle, maybe like podcasts. So I think that we have scored something along the lines of like 40 years of podcasts. We have listened, scored, and analyzed 40 years worth of podcasts. So several thousands of podcast episodes, hundreds of thousands. Each one we've listened, transcribed, and analyzed every single snippet and scored it with AI across different dimensions of quality.
And when you look at that quality, is that quality, because it's about trust, is that quality like It's not whether it's a good podcast, whether it's a well listened podcast, because we have metrics for that. You're trying to measure something else. So, what are you guys actually trying to measure as you analyze these podcasts?
So a couple different things. So one of the things that we measure, and it's a lens into quality, is what we call civility. So civility has to do with whether specific attacks are being made towards a person, towards an entity, towards a group, and what is the level and severity of that attack. Like, is it a conversation between two people that they may be using some cuss words, they may be using some, their own language, but they're not really making attacks to each other? Or is it something that is a statement that is making an actual attack that crosses the line of legally protected characteristics? So we use AI to do that. We call that civility. So how civil a podcast is really determined by the types of attacks, the amount of attacks that are being made. Yeah, that. Civility is one example.
It seems to me that there's a lot of research also happening in this area, right? And maybe 4 or 5 years back, some of these things we have built already may not be possible, with transformers and the language models. There's a lot of context that's required to understand to score that civility. So, how much of in your company the research part and to moving your research to a product? You being the chief of AI and research at Seekr, how do you look at it? How do you even personally divide your time on? Okay, these are the papers I need to read. These are the research I found interesting, and now I need to create a business value out of it for your end customers.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it never stops, right? Like reading papers and taking whatever you um, gather from papers and all the information that you learn from papers and applying it into your product. It's actually very interesting and an exciting task, but also like figuring out which research to follow for which problem is also an exciting task. So, yeah, as a maybe staying to this podcast example, podcast is very, very nuanced. Like, you have speakers that may have different accents, or they may be, the tone may be different, or the way they speak may be faster or slower, depending on the style. You may have 5, 7, 10 different speakers within a podcast. So there's a lot of problems that you're trying to solve to actually score the podcast, right? So you first have to transcribe it, then you have to diarize it, which means that you have to assign the transcription to the actual speaker. And after you do that, you need AI to go through and evaluate every single transcribed snippet along those dimensions that we just talked about, say civility. So all these components of the system require their own research, and there are different areas of research that these components demand, really. So it's constant. To answer your question, is really constant. We really have to be very vigilant of what's out there, the technologies, open source, closed source, things that we develop in house, innovations, inventions that we're making. And it's really constant. The fun part of it all is the iterative nature of it and constantly improving, and hopefully not breaking things, but yeah, constantly improving.
So you talked a little bit about the products that you guys have, but one of the things that you need to do as a third party business who wants to take advantage of Seekr, it's one thing to come to you guys and say, "Can you help me with the civility score?" But you guys have introduced Seekr Flow, which is something to help businesses kind of build their own. I don't know what the best way to describe it, and probably you'll do a better job of it than I will, but like their own way of building trustworthy LLMs and integrating them into their business. So can you talk a little bit about the technology behind Seekr Flow, what it does, how it works, etc.?
The problems that we solve at Seekr that fall under the umbrella of trust, really, and trust in the web. The way we are approaching these problems is we first start by defining the principles, or what we like to think of as the constitution of the domain. Like an AI that will be operating on that domain, how should it behave? What are the principles? What are the rules? What are the boundaries that it should respect and abide by? So that's how we approach kind of solving these problems of, say, like civility, right? Like civility could be defined as a set of principles. There are severe attacks and there are non-severe attacks. Severe attacks are the ones that cross the boundary of legally protected characteristics from the US that are clearly defined from the US Constitution, and there's a number of them. So you can express civility really as a set of principles. And the way we develop AI is to essentially ensure that AI aligns with these principles, learns what civility is in the context of, say, podcasts, understands it, and knows how to behave within the podcast domain. So this inspiration, this technology, this tooling is basically what gave birth to Seekrflow, which is our internal technology for building principle-aligned LLMs and principle-aligned AI more generally, that we now bring into the market and allow enterprises to do so themselves.
Do you help them maybe take a foundation model that they want, or some foundation model you have already built, and help them fine tune and align based on their requirements? After that, do you also help them deploy it? And how, if so, how do you help them deploy it? The hardware specifics, and what is the size of I'm sure that you would need clusters of machines to handle this kind of jobs.
Yeah, yeah. So it's end to end. So someone comes into Seekrflow, and there's different ways to come into Seekrflow. There's an SDK, a Python SDK that will very soon will be available, and everyone will be able to install with pip or any other dependency management thing they like to use, or an API. So you come in to Seekrflow through an SDK or an API, and you come in with minimal data. Really, you come in with what are your principles, the principles of your application. Do you have any documents, any supporting documents, or any supporting data points? Some high level description of your task. You want to build, say, a chatbot that evaluates product labels and checks if they are FDA compliant. Or you want to build a chatbot that answers questions about baggage policies on an airline company. So you come in, say you are the airline company, or let's take the airline company as an example. You come into the API, you bring your documents, maybe you bring some examples that roughly describe the task and what you're trying to do. And Seekrflow takes care all the rest. From you may have different options, like you may for example want to choose a specific large language model that you want, a base model that you want to fine tune because it works on your specific environment, or you like it, or it's cheap, you can afford, right? So you have a selection of base models that you can use, and then Seekrflow takes care of all of the rest, from understanding the task, producing the fine-tuning data for that base model, all the way to like this self-critiquing loop that the model will do, and essentially will improve itself with access to different tools like web search APIs, calculators, whatever the application may be. And in the end, you have a deployed model that learns how to behave within the principles and knows how to do the task that you gave it.
Okay, so is there a metric? So do you is there a monitoring mechanism for your customers to see if, there are instances when a language model after a while doesn't really perform when it was performing maybe at day zero. So is there a monitoring mechanism to keep make sure the customer is happy, and also is there some automated things that you do even after you have deployed the inference to make sure the health of the system is as expected?
We expose a lot of different metrics, both in terms of like deployment and um, tracing, logging, all those kinds of things that any Seekr Flow user has access to, and they can actually look at for their own application. But also during the model training or fine tuning, different metrics like how does the loss function progress, different checkpoints, mistakes that the model may have made on specific instructions, things like that, that the user, the Seekr user can look at and really understand what the model is doing and if it's truly meeting the requirements of their application.
The goal is to build the system that follows the initial parameters that the customers has given you, and it has a trust boundary out of which the idea is that the LLM will not go out. Similar to when we develop a security model, there's a threat modeling. Similar for that, you have an LLM trust model. And with the fine tuning and with the different process you have in aligning, you ensure that it is in that trust boundary, and it behaves like that.
Correct.
Got it. That's really awesome, and I'm sure a lot of customers are very interested to use that, especially with a lot of open source models out there. They don't. This is one of the biggest concern, right? I know you have deployed on Intel Tiber Cloud. We have worked very closely in the last couple of months on doing that. How is it going? How has your experience been? You have used almost all the different type of accelerators Intel have, from Gaudi 2 to Intel data center GPUs to our Xeon systems. I'm sure your customers will also be using these systems. So could you talk about how your experience been coming to the Intel stack?
Yeah, it's been great. We've primarily been using different hardware for our AI. Maybe like 6 months ago, we got introduced to Gaudis and started using the Gaudis for our different workloads, and it's been a great experience. Um, the Gaudis are very interesting chips that are very performant. Um, so we have different products and applications deployed on the IDC, on the Intel Tiber Developer Cloud. And we, like you said, Raul, we pretty much have used the entire spectrum of Intel products, from the Gaudis to the Intel Max Series GPUs to all the way to like the Xeons. So for our podcast transcription and diarization and scoring pipeline, we use a mix of things. We use the Intel Max Series GPUs, we use the Xeons, we use Gaudis for large language model inference and scoring. So we use a mix of things. Seekr it really depends on the application. So an enterprise comes in, and depending on their budget and on their application requirements, they can choose the different Intel hardware. For example, if the application's budget allows it, both fine tuning and inference could be done on the Gaudis. But maybe the application doesn't have very strict latency requirements, and a Xeon CPU is okay. So the customer can take that model and put it on the CPU and deploy it there and run inference from there.
Is that something that they can configure through your UI? Is that something like if I'm using Seekr I get to decide that through the Seekr UI, or is that something I have to work with you guys as I get ready to deploy my solution?
Yeah, so Seekr the two main objects, and I'll speak specifically to the Seekr SDK. There are two configuration objects. One is the training configuration, the training config, like we call it, and the other one is the infrastructure config. So the training config will have the specific parameters of your experiment. How many epochs, what data you have, what is the base model that you're trying to use. And the infrastructure config will actually contain all that stuff, like what is the cluster that you want this job to run to? What is the hardware of that cluster? Is it an HPU? Is it a CPU? Is it a GPU? So all that is actually configured via the SDK.
Awesome. This is one question I ask to a lot of founders. Some of this thing I already know because we have been communicating, but for the general audience, on a day-to-day, what kind of tools do you use to develop your software? Like, what's on your laptop? Like, do you use IDEs, VS Code, NeoVim, or do you have a very niche thing, or are you an Emacs person? How do you develop
There
your
it is.
software from?
Emacs or Vim. That's really what he's asking.
Yeah, you know, I'm generally pretty simple. I mean, I like PyCharm a lot. I use PyCharm. Uh, I don't code much in anything other than Python, which I'm happy about. Uh, and yeah, in terms of like, yeah, I use Sublime and Vim sometimes, VI. Um, but my day to day is really PyCharm. I'm not a big notebooks fan. I don't like notebooks, and I kind of wanna I kind of wanna you know I don't know. Notebooks are nice, but uh, I think that they kind of steal away from software engineering a little bit.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
Some of the
always
notebooks in the Julia ecosystem is a little bit better, and I'm hoping some of those learnings from that is coming to Jupyter. Yeah, PyCharm. Like I'm sure any Python developer would have used that for a long period of time in one part of their life. I have PyCharm installed in my multiple systems, but for me, it's that I use many laptops and many computers. It's to set it up. If it was one machine, I would probably use an IDE that's full featured. But it's easier for me to use a Vim or VS Code remote terminal. It's like 2 minutes to set up and get all my extensions ready. That's how I go.
So when you guys were developing this, you mentioned that Seeker Flow was kind of the internal guts of how you developed kind of these other products that you had, like Align and Generate. But now you're taking Seeker Flow and you're exposing it to other developers so they can kind of take advantage of it as well. How many iterations did you have to go through, and what were the challenges of taking your internal tool and then trying to make it into an external product that people could actually use by themselves?
Yeah, so the iterations were quite a few. As with any product, you start from something very basic and you expand, you add capabilities. Um, so our starting point was, how do we build a system that knows how to respect something confined, like say like generalistic principles for news articles. So the first thing that we need to do is to actually define the journalistic principles. What are they? And then how do we build a system around that we can have AI that knows how to respect them. Um, the next iteration was for a little broader, for something say like web documents. What consists quality in web documents, right? Do they, for instance, talk about different types of either using profanity, toxicity, uh, mentions of arms and ammunition, things like that, right? So kind of slowly expanding the scope of the problem, all the way to actually when it becomes an actual product that could be applied pretty universally. So I think that the iterations kind of correspond to the classes of problems that we were solving and generalizing and kind of reducing one problem to another. Like I think that um, the same the same principles that we learned in computer science school, that you learn about a problem and you have an algorithm and then you reduce that solution to another problem. I think the same principles apply here as well. You start with something simple and you start building out and expanding capabilities and increasing complexity slowly until you get to something very powerful that could be pretty general.
And then the refactoring time to actually make it into something you can ship.
Right, right, right. And don't ship on a Friday. That's the golden rule. One thing, Stefano, so you alignment, right? So there is an aspect of careful curation of the data that you use to fine tune that could really help. There's aspect of things like RLHF or DPO or even things like RPO, and many other different techniques are coming out, right? Is there any particular technique that has stood out for you in your experience for aligning, or do you use any of these techniques, or is there something internal that you have developed on your own that you use to align some of these LLMs?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different kind of ways that people and developers and scientists think of aligning specific LLMs to specific principles, and the way to get there, different from application to application, like RLHF with human feedback, or instruction fine tuning, supervised fine tuning, all those things. Um, the What we're trying to take away is basically like the laborious task of having to generate and produce all the data. Like annotating data is laborious, creating data is laborious, and it's not very clear how much data is needed, how much data is enough, what kind of data is needed. What are the boundaries that need to be explored further? What are the gaps in the knowledge that the LLM or the AI may have or may not have that need more exploration, more teaching, more probing, right? So I think that our technology mostly tackles these problems of efficiently and economically using the human expert to teach the AI and constantly test the AI.
Makes sense. And it's sort of like understanding the limitations of our understanding of these models also, of how it works and how it doesn't work. Like you said, what part of information it doesn't have. There's no clear way of understanding it until we give it a prompt and we get a hallucinated response. And there's always a defined test case. Always there could be an out of box input that a user gives it and it gets something else. So again, I think that come back to that trust modeling and making sure whatever works, whatever algorithm works. It's not about the algorithm. It's curation of the data and combination of all these things to make sure that you have a solid, fine-tuned and aligned AI.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So trust is really an end-to-end operation. It starts with the data, how we develop, how we run our experiments, how we monitor them, how we deploy them, all the way to really like tune these models to behave. I think that one big component of trust that we didn't talk about is actually explainability. Um, explainability is a very, very fascinating area, but most recently, I think that it kind of fell on its head with large language models. That it's all the different explainability methods that are or that have been developed in the past few years. They're just not going to work for large language models, um, and like large transformers more generally. So I think that that's where we are essentially very focused on uh, explainability for large transformers, because they are going to be used everywhere. They are going to be making decisions about people's lives. They are going to be deciding about who gets a loan, which patient gets which treatment, who gets accepted to like which school, right? Like AI is going to be used to teach, for teaching, education. So AI needs to be transparent, and one implementation of transparency is different explainability algorithms. So that's what we are really focused on at Seekr, and explainability is actually a big part of Seekr Flow as well.
That's awesome. And we know explainability algorithms has been going through this churn. It's been a while. There have been different techniques, but I think now is a critical moment. Like you said, like this is deployed LLMs and language models and multi-models are getting deployed everywhere, and we don't have a really good solution for that. So all the researchers, all the undergrad and grad students doing PhDs and doing an explainability, I think the next few years are going to be really awesome for you in the as a career to figure out and solve these problems because almost all companies have that. The one thing, Stefanos, right, once you deploy, right, there are techniques that's beyond the language model, like prompt injections or poisoning attacks and few other things. In your internal products, how do you handle that? And do you see that your customers can also learn from some of the things you have been doing, so they can implement that safeguards as well, not just the model, but so that similar to traditional web development, we have user input validation for cross-site scripting and things like that, right? So, are you looking into that as well as part of the Seekr flow as a product?
Um, yeah, Secureflow is a tool for developers and enterprises, right? So it could be used right off the box to really develop AI. Different enterprises and different applications may have the different requirements and different approaches and testing and level of rigor that they need to actually meet. So we make it easy for the enterprises and developers to really plug in their own procedures to Secretflow. Um, but as far as our own products go, I think that yeah, it's a really interesting question because we on the one hand, for our Align product, we're not necessarily prone to prompt injection and things like that. And because what we're doing with Align is evaluating and really like analyzing content. We're not providing a service for people to generate ads or right. So Align is actually not prone to that at all. It's very robust to it, and we've made sure our internal testing is ensures that the models know the different types of attacks and the different types of obscenities or how different levels of quality may be violated, if you will. But if you go to Seekr Generate, um, we employ different practices for testing our models, but they're all governed, but by our internal constitution. Like the Seekr Constitution uh, is essentially governed by different principles along the lines of objectivity, neutrality, explainability is one of them. Providing all views on a topic, not just one. A both ends of the spectrum. So um, yeah, all our testing is basically governed by our internal constitution.
No, that's a great point what you said. So essentially, each enterprise ideally would want their own constitution based on their principles, what they are pursuing and all those things. And the one advantage working with an company like yours, with Seekr, is that you already have a couple of multiple products in production, and you're now exposing how you did that to a larger wide enterprise and developers, so they can learn from you on how to the things you did to iterate, not to do that again, so you can directly go to production faster. And also these principles that's beyond technology, right? Like that's a very important thing. What is your constitution? And that should drive how your data is created, how your language models are created. There's a bigger discussion in AI safety and things like that that comes into picture.
No, I was gonna say like that's it, right? Like each business or each enterprise or each application has its own constitution, its own principles, its own documents, its own rules that should govern the application. And you come to Secret Flow with your constitution, and Seekr will produce AI that knows how to respect the Constitution.
And what format do I need to bring it in? Can I just bring it in as plain text? Does it have to be organized in a certain way? How big does it need to be? Because I know typically when we think about an AI solution, if I was coming in to use Seekr, do I need to have a lot of documents, or is it something where I can come up with something very small and concise, and Seekr will still be able to apply it to the data and the workflows that I have?
It really could be of all sizes. It could be a lot of documents. It could be very few documents. Really, it could be whatever you have. The thing with Seekr is that it will invoke the human if it needs more information. So if there's no if there's not enough information provided, it will interrupt the process and it will say, "Hey, I need more help here."
That's awesome because you're solving multiple problems because you're bringing the trust modeling, then you're bringing everyone has a lot of data, but very less data curated data. So you're also helping them to generate some of the data. And if for training the language model, and if the model doesn't have enough data to abide by the Constitution, you tell them what to do. So this can also improve their process on collecting data and curating for other businesses also.
Yeah, exactly. So some applications, some examples of constitutions may be, say, like Title 21 regulations about a specific section, say cosmetics or something like that. So you come in with that document, or perhaps with just that URL, that link, that URL that has all the rules and compliance regulations. And what Seekr will do is we'll scrape that. It will structure it into a knowledge graph or a tree or whatever it thinks is the best structure for that application. It will start chewing through it and understanding really the document. And that will be used downstream to different agentic workflows to produce instructions, do supervised fine tuning, deploy, and throughout the process, invoke the human wherever it's needed.
Awesome. Can I compare different models also? Like as a customer, can I have like three models trained in a different sense and pick what model I want at the end? Does that is there that kind of freedom there using Seekr?
That'll be a cool feature. I'll tell my product manager to definitely add it.
We have probably about 5 minutes left. I kind of have two questions, but the first question is you talked a lot about explainability and how important it is, and because it's going to be used for all of these potentially life-changing decisions for people, and you also mentioned that you guys are doing research in that area, which I think is really important. But just a philosophical question: until we get explainable AI in those areas, do you feel like that limits the ability to use our AI solutions as, I'll say, deciders versus potentially, I guess, I'm using Intel terms, which isn't great right now, but like somebody who makes the decision versus somebody who assists in making the decision? Do you think that we're limited until we have that explainability?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that until explainability really we solve it in AI, we won't have what we call contestability, right? So if AI is used to make decisions, then those decisions need to be contestable. And if needed, at court, right? You need to be able to interrogate the machine. You need to be able to understand why the machine made a certain decision. What was the data point that was influential in that decision making? Different notions of explainability are going to be or are so critical to what I called contestability, right? Like being able to really understand why the machine made a certain decision. And until we have that, I don't think that AI could be used as or should be used as a decision maker.
Okay, awesome. And then the very last question, which Raul has heard this many times, but the question I always ask my guests is, where do they hope technology is going? So for you, where do you think or hope that technology goes in the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years?
Um, yeah, so I think that we have seen some very amazing things about that generalist foundation models can do. Uh, but also we have seen their pitfalls, right? Like, they don't know about recent facts and events. They don't know, they're not connected to the physical world. Yes, you can do that with RAG, I know, but RAG is expensive. RAG is slow. So I'm very excited to see AI that is constantly learning uh, about, and it's constantly connected to the physical world, just how humans do, right? Like, we as humans learn as we see, learn as we live. Our internal weights are being updated all the time. They're not frozen, and we're not using a rag system, right? Whenever we are updating our weights all the time. So I think that philosophically, that's a pretty exciting um, area that I think we will see progress in. Uh, Multimodality is also like a very well known one. Humans don't learn just from text, learn from a lot of different modalities. Um, and I think that we're going to see a lot of um, domain specific AI and foundational generalist foundation models. Um, there's so much they can do. Uh, there's So I think that we're going to start seeing a lot of um, either smaller models being deployed on specific domain applications or different interesting fine tuning techniques that are more efficient, cheaper, more cost effective, all those things.
That's perfect. And the thing is that one thing you're doing there is that you're building all the tools and you're removing essentially the complexity for creating these kind of models. It could be small language models or anything that can be deployed anywhere. And you won't have all the use cases. We don't won't have all the use cases, but there's like more than 7 billion, 8 billion people out there. But if we remove the complete complexity and making AI equitable, so much of cool applications that can come out of these kind of things. So I think that perfectly aligns with the mission of Seekr as well. Trust, make it easy to create and deploy safe AI.
Yeah, great.
All right. Well, and with that, we'll let that be the last word. Thank you, Stefanos, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here.
And Raul, as usual, thanks for joining as well.
Thank you, Tony. This was great.
All right. And so that ends our podcast for today. Thank you, our listeners, for joining us on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube or on iTunes, Spotify, etc. Thanks for listening. Bye.